This year, everybody's been asking, why 420? If cannabis has been legalized, why is 420 actually needed? Well, on October 17th, cannabis was legalized across the country in Canada. It was a monumental day that was celebrated nationwide by those curious about cannabis, those who use it from time to time in secret, as well as those who fought long and hard to get us to where we're at today. Make no mistake, cannabis legalization didn't happen because our government came to this bright idea on their own. Much the opposite, in fact. We use this opportunity to inform our government that we're not happy with the status quo. Some could argue that activists will never be happy with what they're given, and while that may be true for some, that's a foolish assumption to make. Since legalization, many have given up the fight, so to speak, and even joined with licensed producers. There are those as well who simply want what is right and fair. Patience might not be our strongest virtue, but it doesn't change the fact that there's issues that need to be addressed. Those who have fought for legalization and are experienced with its commerce are being pushed aside in favor of government folk who have absolutely zero knowledge or experience in the industry. We see a culture that we've built in the shadows of a Gestapo-like enforcement being pulled piece by piece into this legal market, but now these pieces are completely out of order. If the federal government was truly wanting to protect the public from the dangers of cannabis, they would first eliminate the criminal sanctions of it. This is not to say that there should be zero regulation. However, a balance of who's prosecuted and for what, for example, is absolutely stark in contrast. Why is it that a medical dispensary can be raided around the same time that a licensed producer is caught selling non-licensed cannabis, the same stuff that the dispensaries have been selling? And while the employees of this dispensary are facing 14 years in prison, employees at Bonafide have absolutely zero criminal prosecution. They broke the same law and sold the same product. Only one has real consequences. This is hypocrisy at its finest and a perfect example of how certain groups of people are immune to the law that the rest of the public has to follow. All the while, the government regulation is stealing the bit of culture that remains and spitting it back out as a garbled mock-up of what looks nothing like the market that existed before and even still after legalization. While this may actually be the idea and intent, it's simply ridiculous that and the majority of those who consume cannabis see this government facade for what it is. This is why the government is on a downward spiral in regards to their desired intent of removing the black market and are destined to fail unless some parts of the Cannabis Act are revisited and rewritten. Strict over-regulation is rampant and rears its head in the form of excessive taxing schemes on both producers as well as retailers and the consumers who buy the product. When people are able to get a higher quality product cheaper and more conveniently than using the legal source, they'll never make the switch. Over-regulation also exists in the form of the oligarchy that the Ontario government and others have created by making themselves the sole provider of cannabis to the province that they belong to. Not only does this and has this created supply chain issues, but it also creates a stale market where the prices across retailers can barely vary on a dollar, not to mention product that's been pre-packaged months beforehand for sale at an unknown point in the future. Packages for recreational users are labeled without expiration dates, yet the government screams at the underground market for accountability and quality control. Yet more hypocrisy. In 2015 to 2016, there was 77,000 alcohol-related hospitalizations across Canada, which is 2,000 more than all the heart-related ones put together. There's 4,000 to 5,000 deaths across Canada per year related to alcohol. Cannabis has never killed a user by direct use ever, but we're well aware of the effects of alcohol. You can literally poison yourself and die. Which brings into question packaging for cannabis, clearly meant to protect young people and deter misuse, but also clearly warn the user about risks surrounding what they're about to consume. Things like addiction statistics, warnings of psychiatric episodes or mental illnesses, even comparing cannabis to the consumption of cigarettes. Perhaps alcohol should be sold in the same manner, considering how much of a health burden it is to the hospitals and the public. 5,000 alcohol deaths related deaths per year. Why isn't alcohol sold in preventative packaging to warn people that domestic violence fueled by alcohol can make victims 60 to 70% more likely to end up in the hospital or even dead? Why don't bartenders required to dispense beer and liquor in packaging wrapped in warnings meant to remind the customer that the product that they just bought is potentially dangerous to not only them, but others around them once they've consumed it? What about an excise sticker? Anyone can make alcohol in their basement and can get a license to sell it without issue. More hypocrisy. Pocket lining and money is a big factor here, but that's an issue for another day. At the foundation of it all, and the whole point of this, is that there's only so much hypocrisy that can happen before we're being told one thing and that they're doing another. They're actually telling us one thing about everything and doing another. Another term for this, generally speaking, is gaslighting. That's the focal point for this year's 420 event, and it's no more gaslighting. The amount of talk that both the federal government as well as our provincial governments have done in regards to the goal of protecting the use and keeping profits out of the hands of criminals is significantly substantial. The amount of things that they've done to actually work towards that goal and rather than against it is almost equally as staggering. Time and time again, one thing is said and another is done or happens. Every time they overregulate the market in some way, they open up the avenue to the revenue of the underground market. Prices too high for example, shop with one of the hundreds, if not thousands, of online dispensaries that have opened up across the country. Dirt cheap prices and price breaks are increasingly abundant in a market that on the legal side is taxed more heavily than any other substance in its class by far. The ridiculous notion that cannabis is legal to possess in Ontario but hardly legal to consume unless you're in one of the 1%, generally speaking, is profoundly impressive. Cannabis can't be consumed in parks, most sidewalks, anywhere where an open window might be present, or even in your own backyard if you happen to have neighbors that disagree with the smell. Meanwhile, the icing on the cake is that the Smoke-Free Ontario Act prevents social areas or lounges from existing, where those who would want to consume their cannabis could do so. Here in Ontario, they have literally fooled the public into believing one thing, that cannabis is legal, but the reality is quite another. Cannabis is definitely legal for some, but not for everyone. The government's been lying to the public for years in regards to cannabis at both the federal and provincial levels to varying degrees of success. We're tired of being told one thing when we know better. We're taking back our reality, and we won't be told we're criminals when the only ones who call us that are the people making these ridiculous rules.